Welcome to my channel. In this video, we'll be talking about the various techniques for food storage, or in other words, which is called as food preservation. Now, this is essentially a process of preventing food spoilage and extending the shelf life of a particular food product. So, you can imagine how crucial this is for the food industry because it ensures that all the food that we get in the market is safe to consume and can be stored for a long period of time. You don't need to recall your product often. It can be kept in the market for a long period of time. That is why the food preservation techniques are so very important to a person working in the food industry. Objectives of food preservation are to prevent the growth of pathogenic microorganisms or even organisms that cause spoilage of food. So we have already seen how the spoilage of food is caused by the growth of bacteria or yeasts, molds, and that leads to a change in the texture of the food, sometimes the flavor and even the appearance of the food. Now when we talk about the pathogens, we know that there are a lot of pathogens like E. coli, Salmonella. There are so many different types of bacterial and fungal pathogens or even viral pathogens which can cause an infection if you take in a food that has been contaminated by it. So preservation methods are mainly to slow down or completely stop the growth of such microorganisms and to ensure that the shelf life of the food is being extended because the organisms are not there to deteriorate the food. The second objective of food preservation is to maintain the nutritional value. See, what happens is there are certain preservation methods like freezing or canning which helps us to preserve the nutrients in food. So food by itself has a lot of enzymes, so it can deteriorate over time, which will significantly affect its taste or the texture or the appearance. Now, if we utilize a proper food preservation technique, it can help us to retain some of those qualities of the original food as well as ensure that there is the nutrition is being kept intact. So it's not just for stopping the growth of organisms, it is also to maintain the nutritional value. And of course, the third objective of food preservation is definitely to save money. We know that any kind of food wastage is expensive, whether it is at home or if you're looking at a commercial setting. So preservation methods basically help us to keep our food items like vegetables or fruits or meat, etc., well past their usual expiration date so that we don't need to throw them and we don't lose money. So ultimately, these are the objectives of food preservation. We look at the main principles that are employed in food preservation, after which we look at some of the important food preservation techniques. So the principles of food preservation mainly are based on the temperature control. Temperature control is something that's very, very essential, not just in long-term preservation of food, but also when we talk about food storage for a short period of time. Even then, the temperature control is really important. So temperature control, mainly we talk about the low temperatures. Of course, we will see high temperature also being used for food preservation, but low temperature is something that can slow down or in fact sometimes even stop the growth of microorganisms. So that's why we have seen how refrigeration or freezing are very commonly used even in our homes. The second part is moisture control. Now, reducing the moisture content of any food helps us to cut down the organisms that grow in that food. The reason being, when you dry a particular food, when you dehydrate a particular food, what happens is that that moisture is now unavailable for the organism to grow also. So now the organisms don't grow over there and you can store the food for a longer period of time. And a very good example for this would be when we have dehydrated fruits, they stay for a much longer period of time in comparison to fresh fruits. Then the third aspect of food preservation or principle of food preservation is pH control. So we know that microorganisms require a specific pH to grow. If you control the pH of a particular food, then automatically you are controlling how many organisms grow in that particular food. So you're either able to slow down the growth of organisms or even completely sometimes stop it. Because the most common way of using pH control is by acidification of a food. That is, you are lowering the pH level of a food. Most organisms are unable to survive in such high levels of acid and you are able to preserve that food for a longer period of time. The last one is by using chemicals. So chemical preservation involves the usage of chemical compounds like salt, sugar, vinegar. You have a lot of other chemicals as well which are used to preserve the food. We look at some of the important techniques in detail. Now, when we have the food preservation techniques, we are actually spoiled for choice when it comes to the food preservation techniques. It is because there are so many different types of preservation methods that are being used from several years. It's not something that has been discovered today or yesterday. It has been in usage for a long period of time. Not just that, a lot of food experts are constantly researching newer preservation methods, so that which range from a simple process of just chilling, or it can even come up to something very complex like canning or vacuum packing. So all such newer methods are also being utilized. Even biopreservation has been used. So we have different types of food preservation methods. We shall look into the details of a few important ones. One of the most commonly used methods of food preservation in a home or a commercial setup is by lowering the temperature. So lower temperatures ensure that the microorganisms are unable to grow over there. Their activities are slowed down, their enzymes are slowed down. Even the enzymes present in food are unable to act because all the chemical reactions essentially are slowed down when it comes to low temperatures. So that is the main idea behind using low temperature. But when I say low temperature, it's you have different low temperatures. For example, we could have cellar storage. Cellar storage is where we use a temperature of about 15 degrees Celsius. So this is usually used for root crops or for potatoes or for onions, apples, where you are lowering the temperature. It's lower than the room temperature, but then you don't keep it in the fridge. The second part is where you have a refrigerator. Now here the temperature is from 0 to 5 degrees Celsius. So it's not freezing. It's a little above freezing and then up to 5 degrees Celsius. This is where we usually store vegetables, fruits, sometimes milk and milk products, poultry, meat. At times we store meat as well in the refrigerator. And the third one is freezing, where you use temperatures which are much below 0 degrees Celsius. Usually in a commercial freezer, we tend to use between minus 18 up till minus 40 degrees Celsius. So perishable food items like meat or poultry, fish, ice cream, some sort of vegetables like frozen peas, we get frozen corn, we get all of these are used, for all of them we use the freezing temperatures. So each one of these has their own rules that you need to follow while use. Even when we say low temperature, there are certain ways in which you stack the food in a refrigerator. For example, if possible, we should use a separate refrigerator for raw foods and some separate one for the ready to eat or high risk foods. Also, if you are using the same refrigerator, then it should be ensured that you keep all the items which will leak out. For example, raw meat should be kept at the bottommost shelf, whereas ready to eat foods should be kept at the top shelf. So I've made a different video for that. You can refer that video to see what are the basics of storing in a refrigerator. What is the what kind of storage should we have? We have to use the first in first out system, etc. But then using low temperatures is definitely a very easy and a simple method for preservation of food. The second one is when we are using higher temperatures. So we know that when we cook the food or when we heat the food, it kills the microorganisms because it alters their protein structures, it destroys their enzymes. Because there are no enzymes, the enzyme activity comes down, not just of the food item but also of the microorganisms that are there. So there are different ways in which we can use high temperatures. The first and the easiest one is boiling, like how we would have seen boiling of milk. We boil the milk and then keep it in the fridge. So that's one easy way of storing it, where we have used the higher temperature and then we are using the low temperature. So boiling is done at 100 degrees Celsius. This you could use for rice, for vegetables, milk, like I said, sometimes even for fish and meat. Pasteurization is another method. It's a heat treatment where you are killing a part of the microorganisms that are present, and here we usually tend to use temperatures below 100 degrees Celsius. Of course, under pasteurization you again have different types. For example, we have low temperature holding, high temperature short time, and then we have even the ultra high temperature pasteurization, which uses temperatures above 100 degrees Celsius. For example, it uses 135 degrees Celsius for 2 seconds. So we need to remember that as the temperature is increased, the time that you are pasteurizing it for has to be reduced. Otherwise, you're going to spoil the proteins, or you're going to destroy the proteins of that particular food item itself. So pasteurization is something that we use for juices, it is used for wine, it is used for milk as well. The third one is canning. It's a process in which the foods are heated in a sealed container. So you can see over here, it's a hermetically sealed as in an airtight jar or an airtight container or a can. and then heat the food to a temperature that destroys the microorganisms or inactivates the enzymes, and then it is left inside that container. So that's why canning is really good, because you not only use temperature, you're also using an airtight jar. So it's like a vacuum sealed process. This is very commonly used for soup, for you would have seen different varieties of tinned foods like beans or nuts or milk, fish, meat. So many different types of food are canned. It's because you are heating the food within the container and then you're not opening the container. So the container is airtight and hence the organisms are unable to get in. The third one is dehydration. Again, a process that is very commonly been in use from many years together. What we do here is dehydrate the food. That is, we remove all the water in the food, and like I said earlier, the low availability of water content in the food makes it unable for the organisms also to grow over there. This is very commonly used for nuts. You might have seen it for herbs. You might have seen it for fruits like mangoes or figs. Any kind of food, if you dehydrate it, even vegetables like cauliflower or cabbage, if you dehydrate it and then you keep it, you can store it for a longer period of time. So there are different methods for drying or for dehydration. Sun drying is one of the oldest methods, a simple one where you just keep it in the sun. You lay a big sheet and you spread out all the food on that, like the fruits, or usually used for fruits. So you keep it on a mesh screen or on a tray and you leave it in the sunny area for it to dry. Air drying is something very similar to the sun drying, but then you place it in the shade instead of directly in the sun. So this also helps us to, ensure that the food is being protected from the sun's powerful rays. This is commonly used for, the leafy vegetables or for herbal teas, or when they want to, dry spices. They generally tend to use air drying, which is shade drying instead of directly sun drying. The third one is oven drying, where you are using temperature around 60 degrees Celsius and keeping it for a long period of time, like 6 hours or 10 hours. And the last one is electric dehydrators, really energy efficient machines which are much faster than the ovens, and they even have a built-in fan so that the air movement is uniform. So these are some of the methods by which we can dehydrate or remove the water from a food item and store it for a longer period of time. The fourth one that we have is irradiation. Now, irradiation is basically a sterilizing technique where you use radiations like gamma rays or X-rays or even electron beam can be used, and you are using these ionizing radiations to the food, which is going to kill the organisms that are there. It is going to eliminate any kind of insects that are there. So one thing to remember is that when we say irradiated food, it's very different from radioactive food. Irradiated food is not harmful. It does not compromise the nutritional quality of the food. Neither does it change the taste or the texture or the appearance of the food. Why do we go for irradiation? Because it destroys or inactivates the spoilage enzymes that are there in the food itself. Also, it delays the ripening of the foods, so that's also a good thing for us if we want to keep our fruits for a longer period of time. It's a method of sterilization, so it basically kills all the microorganisms that are there. It not only kills the organisms, it also helps us to control insects and other pests. So irradiated food is really useful for us, and you can see this is the Radura logo, which you can find on foods that have been irradiated. So you would find it like this. It is commonly currently it is being used for fruits, vegetables, meat and seafood. Not all countries have agreed to this, but currently I think it's happening permitted in over 60 countries, including the USA and China. It is being allowed. The fifth one is vacuum packing. So vacuum packing is something that you would have seen often. Vacuum packing is where you are you're completely removing the air from the pack before sealing the pack. So as you can see over here, inside the pack there's very less oxygen permeability, and because the vacuum pump has pulled out all the air inside the pack, it ensures that the food remains fresh. It preserves the quality of the food within the packet. So it prevents oxygen from getting in, because if oxygen would have gotten, it would have reacted with the food. It might have compromised the color or the taste or the smell of the food. Now because there's no oxygen, you have pulled out all the oxygen and your pack is so tight that it doesn't allow any oxygen to permeate through. It ensures that the food looks and remains fresh. Not just that, it also inhibits the growth of aerobic microorganisms. So organisms are unable to get in, and hence you are able to store the food for a longer period of time. Now this is a method which is used for preserving foods like any kind of food actually. For example, the meat or fish, coffee, cereals, nuts, pasta, so many different types of foods can be stored with this. But then you should be avoiding it for food products like soft cheese or for mushrooms, broccoli or Brussels sprouts or cabbage, etc. Some foods which are which release gases and that could expand the bag and compromise the bag. So for such foods, vacuum packing is avoided, but otherwise it really is a very good method for preserving the quality of the food item without heating or doing anything else. The last one we'll be looking at is the use of chemical preservatives. Now, chemical preservatives are also called as food additives because these are basically chemicals that you add to the food. Now, obviously, when you're adding something to the food, you have to ensure that it is non-toxic, or it should be approved by the GRAS system. That is, it should be regarded, generally recognized as safe. That is what the GRAS means to say. So, whatever preservative you add, that should be approved by the FDA or by any other local authority, the authority which is monitoring the food in that particular country, and it should be considered as GRAS, that is in the GRAS category, generally recognized as safe category. Now, chemical preservatives can be either the class 1 preservatives or class 2 preservatives. Class 1 preservatives are examples include sugar, salt, lime juice, vinegar, honey. These are all examples of class 1 preservatives. However, class 2 preservatives are those which are obtained by chemical derivation of compounds like benzoic acid or sorbates, or using propionic acid, or using sulfur dioxide, nitrites. These are all examples of class 2 preservatives. Whatever it is, the reason you add the preservatives is because they help to slow down the spoilage. So they ensure that the appearance or the flavor, the texture of the food is maintained, and they are ensuring that the spoilage organisms are slowed down, the enzymes are being slowed down in that when you add these chemical preservatives. Very, very commonly used for most of the items that we get. So it can be used for the wine, baked goods, biscuits, any kind of pickles, juices, in so many different types you find it. Earlier you might have noticed we used to use the process of sugaring or salting. So salting is where it is used for preserving pickles. Like in pickles you use a high quantity of salt. It is used because it draws out all the water from the food and hence it stops the microbial growth. Even sugar works in a very similar fashion. That's why sugars are used, or sugaring is used for the production of jams. So where you add the fruit, you add a very high quantity of sugar, ensures that the microorganisms don't get any water to grow. So there are different modes of action of chemical preservatives. It differs from one chemical preservative to the other, but generally preservatives can be divided into class 1 and class 2. Now this was a brief about the different techniques that are employed in food storage or in food preservation. I hope this video was useful to all of you. See you all in the next one as well. Bye.